Hello, everybody. Another episode, this episode of Building Bridges, Giving Voices to the Arts. And we are here today with Ara Oshagan. Thank you so much, Ara, for being here. An artist, curator, living in Los Angeles. Ara was born in Beirut, in Lebanon. Yes, I'm so grateful. I'm actually you are engaging with new projects
Uh-huh.
like the new
Yeah,
Armenian
yeah.
Museum in Glendale. So there's all this new probably new path for your work as well, and news around your career, your art practice.
Yes. Well, yeah, I said thank you very much for having me, Marisa. We've been working together in different capacities for several years, and I'm very happy to be here and to share my work and the ideas and to have a conversation about different things about art and curatorial issues and other things. And so, okay, so my start is I always have to start 3 generations ago, 2 generations ago actually, because a lot of my work is very community oriented, and my community was displaced by the Armenian genocide about 100 years ago. So my grandfather's generation, my grandmother, both sides of my family, my mother and my father, all their families were displaced by the Armenian genocide of 1915. And Armenia, the traditional indigenous land of the Armenians on the Armenian highland, which is now current day Turkey. Armenians had been on that highland for millennia, even before the Armenian language was invented. Armenians had been there, and there's this long history connection to that land. But we're displaced completely from that land as a community, and so kind of and started and really that's when our diaspora began. Even though we've had a broader diasporic presence across the planet for many hundreds of years, but sort of the forced displacement diaspora began there, and so kind of my story begins there. My grandfather was displaced on my father's side. My mother's side, her whole family were displaced, um, and my mother's side, they ended up in the Middle East. So when the communities were forced out of the Armenian highlands, ended up in the Middle East and Lebanon, Jordan, Aleppo, Iraq, Iran, all these countries, where there's now, a
Again,
lot of it's like cyclic. Maris. All of the issues began with World War One and the colonial powers being in that area and divvying up the land, putting like Iraq together with different sections of land that communities that did not get along and did not connect together, that should have been separated, given each one should have been given their own space to live and try to negotiate their communities, but they were all kind of put together. And so all the issues we see now started then, actually, in
Yeah,
the Middle
and it's
East.
these geopolitical issues that they keep going, and they're quiet for a little bit, and it's
They
another
just
cycle, and they
every
start
every
again.
yeah every generation has this huge displacement war that they have to go through in that area, unfortunately. And so, like my father, he bounced around many different countries, France and England, and he had like 6 passports during his life or something, and then ended up in Beirut. And what's where my mother ended up in Beirut, because that was like the center of cosmopolitan of the Middle East at the time in the
At that
50s.
time.
That was when everything was happening, the cultural and artistic life was there. So that's where they met, and that's where I was born. Um, and I was myself displaced by 1975, by the war in 1975, and displaced and came to the United States, um, basically.
And probably all this current situation is very touching for you because it's almost living again all that issues
Yeah,
and
yeah,
memories and the family memories and the displacement scenarios there. Just
exactly. Memories and actual
yeah,
friends that I have who still live, for instance, in Lebanon, in Beirut. Beirut was like just last week, and there's like nonstop. There's 20 years of war, and then since then it's constantly been. Yeah, and I mean, a lot of it. unfortunately, is our government meddling in these countries, supporting forces, Israel specifically, that is constantly trying to secure its borders, supposedly, but really creating more war and more displacement for indigenous people who had been there for millennia. So, yeah, part of it falls on us. Part of it is our responsibility.
Yeah, yes, it is. And let me ask you, so when did you move out of Beirut because you were displaced again and you just moved to Los Angeles, or there was
No, I have
another
actually
in
very
between?
strange, very strange trajectory because I first moved to Wisconsin. So
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
I was young, and so my mother actually had left Beirut a few months before the war began, starting a PhD program at the University of Wisconsin. And so when we fled the war, my brother and I, my father, we went to Wisconsin, and she had a place. She was a graduate student. She had a place the size of this my table here, right? It's like a tiny little place, and that's where we went. But then my father then found work in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, actually, at the University of Pennsylvania. So he moved to Pennsylvania, to Philadelphia, and I stayed. We stayed with my mother, and then she moved to a bigger place, obviously, after a few months. Um, but so there's this kind of and so also at the same time, which is a very personal story, is that my parents divorced because of this displacement. So, to me, a lot of my work still kind of reflects on this displacement from Beirut, as well as from previous generations. It's like a community historical displacement, community land, as well as very personal one for me because my family kind of was destroyed by this kind of by the displacement that we had to flee the war. Um, and
And I
then
know your work really focuses on identity, memories. It's all going back to dig into these matters and these moments, actually.
yes, yeah, a lot of my work reflects on that, and it isn't just isolated. Just one my own personal experience, but because it happened before, because it happened to my grandparents' generation, right? So that reflects back on my own displacement, and now it continues to happen
Hmm. Hmm.
for two more generations. In fact, it just happened there recently in Armenia proper, and I've been working there also. So it's this personal, very personal one at its core, but then all around it, it's constantly it's like cascading about in time and space, and so my work try to encompass all of these, to reflect on these with photos and archival images, installation, and those things that you were saying, um, to
Yeah,
try to
and your story.
articulate. Right, this is what we're trying to
Yeah,
do, Marisa. Articulate this kind of situation, this kind of world we live in, our times, and articulate these things that
yeah,
are
and your story
crucial
is
for us.
reflecting, is mirroring everybody else around you in your own communities.
Yeah,
So, mhm.
exactly. Yeah. So, and then
So,
after Wisconsin, I went to even stranger place. I went to Tennessee.
oh, that's the whole idea of these conversations. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And so Wisconsin, and then Tennessee, high school in Tennessee, and then after high school, we moved. It was my mother and I, basically. We moved to LA, and I started university. I started UCLA here, um, and really, I was not a visual artist. Didn't come to visual arts until very late, actually. Um, both my father and grandfather are writers. They're poets, and
Okay.
they write in Armenian. They're pretty well known in the community, um, as well as broadly. They have certain acceptance, certain acknowledgement of their contributions to Armenian arts and letters. And so at first I wanted to be a writer, really. When I first started in school, I was an English major as well as a physics major. So that's the other thing about me. I have this scientific background, which I've kind of left. But I majored in literature, and physics, and then I wanted to be a writer for a long time. Um, and I don't know, things happen, and somehow you feel like that's not um, the kind of thing that kind of meshes with your character. I think one of the things that artists have to realize is that the artwork that you do, the things that you create, have to kind of connect with who you are as a person. And it's not only your mind, what you feel, what you do, but your physical character. And I was always very restless. I was always moving. I would never sit down. I could never sit down. I was moving. And so writing is a very sedentary thing, right? You sit down, you have to sit down for 3-4 hours, whatever. And while photography, the kind of photography I started with, documentary photography, moving in the world and connecting and talking, was much more in tune with who I was, who my person is.
You're creating stories in both, because the photography, they're visual stories.
Exactly.
And
Yes.
with the writing, you really create stories. So it's a different approach to the stories, to the storytelling, basically,
Exactly.
in a
Yes.
certain way.
And this is what I had to kind of realize. It was like, it's not the medium that you use, it, music or photography or writing or this. It's what is it that you have to say, right? So you have to focus on what is it you have to say and how can you say that in the best possible way. And it took me a while to realize that. I don't know. It took me time for us to come to these conclusions that are obvious. Once you come to them, you're like, why didn't I think of that like 10 years ago, right?
Everything needs a process. I don't know, more certain for yourself. Like you say, as a whole, it's interesting when you say that you study science and I say, well, of course, it's the whole, it's the crossover between art, science, technology, writing, and that's, I think today we're looking into an art form that is more holistic in a
Exactly.
certain
Yes.
way, that is not
Yes.
in such a division like that we went through many years of division and separation. Now we're getting back
Exactly, right?
into integrate astronomy, astrology,
Yeah,
philosophy.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, we're in this kind of wonderful time, right? Because literally, like 15, 20 years ago, everything was like, photography is this, it can't be this, science is this. It was all very siloed that way. But now we're living in this time where this kind of interaction, which is obvious, like science in my life, science and literature and photography, they're all deeply interconnected. One feeds the other, and there's this constant flow. It's all interconnected in your mind, right? Or you and your artwork and your curatorial work, it's all enmeshed. Like you
Integrate
can't
that. Yeah,
separate
yeah,
them,
yeah.
but we're like forced to separate them in a way. But now, we're looking at kind of integrating everything that way, right? Looking at those connectivities. Which
Yeah.
is wonderful time to be in, and that's kind of accepted. It isn't like
Well, I
don't
think
think
it's
about that.
even a decade ago,
A decade ago,
you
yeah.
were talking about, something that astrology or astronomy and arts and it was a barrier. And
Yeah,
I also think that the pandemic, I don't know if you agree, but the pandemic created also a moment,
it did.
a breakup point between, before and after, with
Definitely.
all
Very
those
big
ideas.
shift. Yeah. A big shift happened. We don't know exactly what shifted just yet, I think because of the pandemic, but things have significantly changed, I think, after the
Oh,
pandemic in terms of how people look at art and culture and how the integration between the two, you know. Yeah, I think it was a moment for us.
so at what age exactly did you arrive to United States?
I was 10. A very, transformative time in your life when you're really just coming out of the. And so it was, it did have, like, its impact is still ripples. Like, I still feel it, that one big displacement, as well as I said, my family, which was a big shock to me. It was like a big upheaval for me that my family fell apart. When you're 8, 9 years old, you think your family's it. The whole life thing revolves around your father and mother and your community. And we had an extended family in Beirut. We would always be going to different family homes, and that was like completely wiped out, like overnight. And so, yeah, in a way, I'm still So there's a healing process, right, Marisa? We were talking about that earlier, and making art, I think, perhaps is part of that healing process, and you don't realize that you make work for the world, of course, but also for yourself, in reflecting back on this and trying to work through whatever it is. You don't know what it is, but you're just trying to work through it in a way.
Internal pain and things that happen to them, how they engage, some of them more conscious, in a conscious matter more than others, they're doing or how they're doing. But I think it's a process that is a healing process, and that's how they connect.
Yes, exactly. And I think if your art can touch somebody in that way, and they kind of can reflect by looking at your work, they reflect back on their own life in a way, right? And reflect, if an artist, reflect on their own work. So that's the kind of connection that I think is really very deeply felt, and that's probably the best thing we can hope for as artists and curators. A lot of people talk about social change, this, that, but I don't know about that. I don't know what kind of, but if you touch somebody in their mind, they start thinking slightly differently in the way they look at themselves and their own history and their own community by looking at something. That's the best probably we could do.
And I think the most part is the more you change yourself, you change the community that you live in. Believe in that. And I think artists are changing themselves in the process, in their own process.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And as our work looks at our own communities, so we're kind of trying to articulate what the community is and our life and our history, but also we're at the same time defining it in a way, right? By creating that work and others seeing it, then that becomes a marker in that history of that community, of that life. Right, so you're doing this, do two contradictory things in a way, defining or articulating, as well as, I wouldn't say defining. Defining is it's a too strong a word. Articulating, but at the same time, setting markers in that history, right? So we do both at the same time in a way.
And when did you really started to work and produce your own work? When? Around what time and where?
Oh, so it's a funny story. When people ask me, how did you start into photography? I say, I always wanted to be a writer. Okay, that's how it was. And so what I was doing very quickly. I wanted to these really, really short pieces of fiction. So a lot of my work, it started from community. I'm really involved in my community. It has to do with social and political issues, displacement, including, the political issue of Turkey denying that the genocide happened. This is something that's really, really important for the Armenian community. So I'm really connected to that. And for many years in my youth, we were constantly protesting, trying to get Turkey to recognize, the U.S. to recognize. In fact, I met my wife at a demonstration against a Turkish professor. Actually, he wasn't a Turkish professor, a professor at UCLA teaching that the Armenian genocide didn't happen. So we were at this protest, and that's how we met.
Well, a very good alignment.
Yes, very romantic, right?
Yes. And you do, and it comes this question to my brain. So, do you use calligraphy in your work?
Do I use
calligraphy in your work?
Yes, I didn't used to. So I started with just photography, but my practice has expanded. I use handwriting. As I said, my father was a writer, and so I have a lot of his handwriting that I've used in my work. In fact, I can show you some of that work.
Exactly.
And then I use also medieval manuscripts and medieval prayer scrolls that I do interventions into with photography. So I use script in many ways, script and handwriting of the language itself, which connects you to this kind of millennial history.
Mexico.
Since we talked about script, I can show you this very new work that I did, this scroll work. So this work is about 12 feet long this way and about 16 inches this way. It's a scroll made of work from Beirut. So one of the projects I had to do a number of other projects to kind of build my photographic, let's say, vocabulary before I decided to return to Beirut, because it was going to be like one of the most important things that I did, and one of the most significant things that I did in my life, to return to Beirut to photograph there. And so I did return in 2014, photographed through 2018, 2019, and I actually did a book of photographs. And then all these other projects grew out of the work that I did in Beirut, because I was so connected in so many different ways. And so this is one of the works that came out of it. And my father, used to live in Beirut. Obviously, we lived together, and he wrote a lot in Beirut. He was one of the kind of intellectual intelligentsia in Beirut. And so the background of the scroll is his handwriting. It's his from pages from an essay that he was writing back in the 80s. By the way, he passed away in 2000. He's away about 25 years ago. Yeah. And the images that are on top of his writing are fragmented images from my photographs from Beirut. So over the 5-6 year period that I went back and forth, I took a lot of photos. And what I did in the idea of the scroll is that I broke the images, my photographs, up. So these are excerpted from my photographs. So there's a fragmentation going on, very similar to the process of fragmentation, which is kind of a diasporic fragmentation, when you're displaced from your indigenous lands and you have to live in other cultures, and so there's this kind of fragmentation going on. And so the fragments are taken from my photos from Beirut, but they're kind of brought back together here in kind of new panorama. So there's a restructuring, there's a breaking up and a kind of a restructuring of the work here, going in like two directions at the same time. What's that?
It's almost like a timeline.
Yes, exactly. And the photos are across many, many years. So there's also impression of time here from different scenes from Beirut. Sort of this panorama of life, in a way, of unfragmenting, healing. So there's a kind of almost a healing process in a way in this work that we're talking about that. So it's significant that we brought this up. And so my father's kind of that inspiration, that script, that the Armenian that's been around for millennia, it kind of forms the background in which these fragments are fragmented as well as brought together. East Asian, kind of inspired by East Asian scrolls, which is a form that I'm really connected to, because there's this kind of narrative, right? When you move from left to right or right to left, you could go either way. The East Asian, Korean, and Japanese and Chinese scrolls have a very clear historic narrative usually, but this is more of an abstract narrative. But there's definitely, there's a narrative. The way to...
Oh, definitely is.
So the way to interact with the work is you walk along it. It's about 15, 16 inches.
I love this piece. This is your most recently work?
A few months ago I did this. I had an exhibition. I had a huge wall. I was like, what am I going to do on this wall? So I've been thinking about this idea, and I had done something similar, but then I kind of made it very large, 12 feet, so that it could cover this whole wall. I just put some of my newer work here. I just did an exhibition at the Los Angeles Public Library downtown.
And this is very recently. I know what's like a few months ago, no?
Yes, yeah, this is very recent. It ended in December of last year. No, it opened November. It ended. It was through this year. So in this exhibition, I had three major walls here, and what I wanted to do is kind of make this connectivity, this kind of 200-year connectivity. And so on this wall that you're seeing here, this is my work from Los Angeles. I photographed the Los Angeles Armenian community, diasporic community. That was actually the first project that I worked on when I started into photography. And I was telling this story, so I wanted really, really short pieces of fiction. I was writing pieces of fiction. I wanted photographs with them.
Okay.
And I asked my friend to take photos, and he took some photos, and I didn't like the photos. And I was like, I can take some pictures. Let me take some pictures with these. And that's how I started, completely kind of by this impetus of writing that I started in photography. And then I got very deep into doing it. Almost 10 years I photographed the Armenian community in Los Angeles, where
Wow.
I photographed deaths and christenings and family life, but as well as streets and prisons. This is a photo, can't see very well, but it's like in a prison. I photographed an Armenian prison. LGBTQ life back like 15 years ago when it was LGBTQ was not even invented, the word. These are two men kissing, and then other family life. And so this kind of my project in Los Angeles was represented on this wall with this large mural. This is...
And how many years was that project, or you kept that project going?
Yeah, it was like almost 10 years I photographed. Yeah, on and off, and I would pick up my camera, go into the community, take pictures, and it was over many, many years. And I did other projects in the meantime, but I will also always come back to this project.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, in a way, the way I see it, is like this Armenian diaspora that was displaced 100 years ago. So there's a 100-year history here that lands us here in Los Angeles. On the wall to its right is this series of work that I just started like a couple of years ago, where I photographed Armenians who were recently displaced from their indigenous homeland, very much like what happened to my grandfather's generation, grandmother generation. This community was displaced from their own homelands like 2 years ago. So I returned there, I started photographing them. I'm working with an author. She's doing oral histories, and so these are portraits and they're snippets of their stories of what they went through and their past and their dreams of the future. And so this is kind of representing today. So the LA
And
work,
I love the consistency in your work, in the way that your practice is intertwined between your life, your memories, your family, and the reality around you, your community here in LA.
yes, exactly. And then this community, I mean, I sometimes felt I was when my grandmother generation got displaced. This is them, in a way, it's them, and I'm photographing them now, 100 years later, in this kind of in this strange connectivity that I felt sometimes when I was doing this project. I'm still doing this project, but then what I wanted, Marisa, quickly, is that I wanted to not only focus on the past or the present displacement, but I wanted to imagine a future. So I imagined 100 years from today, so 100 years in LA today, and then 100 years from today, the Armenians, this community who was displaced today returns to their homeland. And I used, what I did is I took portraits that I had taken of them, of these portraits, and I used generative AI to create descendants. And so I created 4 generations of descendants from actual photographs. You know, as you know, there's lots of issues in terms of using AI to create images because of ethical issues and copyright issues. So I'm not engaged in that. I'm using my own photos to create new photos, descendants of displaced communities, 4 generations later, and then these are 6 of the portraits that I generated, and imagining they return to their homeland 100 years after their grandmothers and grandfathers' displacement from their home.
Almost just finding the way to get an ending,
Yes.
an ending to the story, and with a
Yes.
healing, within a healing process into those generations. I love that.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. There's a healing process all throughout, right? And this, I really wanted to imagine return right of return, ability to return that I don't have 100 years later, I'm imagining they have. And then the background is one of the photographs of the Armenian highlands.
You did like you went from the past to the present to the future.
Yeah, this was.
That's the real timeline.
You just no, I know. We just saw it, and the other thing about that is that this is the first exhibition in, as far as I know, in Los Angeles that used Western Armenian as the first language. I don't know if I have any pictures of it. Yeah, you can see it here. So on the left is Western Armenian, and on the right is English. So it was the first exhibition that used Western Armenian, and that's really important, not because Western Armenian is a language that's on the UNESCO endangered languages list. So it's in that language in diasporic that it's dying language, and so to stand it up, to make it prominent, make it visible is a very important.
To make a statement with using the language in the exhibition. Yeah.
Yes, exactly, and it isn't that a lot of people are going to read the Armenian, but it's just it's a monument there that this language exists and it's here.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I think especially in this case, it's part of the healing process, part of having that land recovered, and with the future generation is to recover the language as well.
Exactly, the language, exactly. And my father and grandfather both being writers, so that takes a very, very important place in me and also in my work.
Through this time that I know you, I know that you've been always and constantly showing.
Yeah, I think I've been fortunate somewhat to have some visibility, but still, Marisa, like getting institutions to pay attention to, as you know, it's so difficult to get institutions to larger institutions or even medium-sized institutions to pay attention. It's very difficult. So there's this constant hustle that you have to go through as an artist. But that's, it's very, very important to make that, in my life, the secondary, to make the work. I think the important thing is to create the work, to be true to yourself and to whatever narrative it is that you're trying to be true to your own voice, and then to the work you create. You need to be true to things.
Did you have a turning point in your career? I know I have this question, which is great. Usually I don't do this question, but I have this question because it's a complex scenario. You have these two worlds that they're parallel worlds, but sometimes it's really difficult to see how you work or navigate them.
Yes, exactly. It's a very good question. And when we do the podcast, I'm going to ask you the same question, okay?
Oh.
So I got into curatorial work because it seemed to me important to not only show your work, but to show other artists' works that you thought were really important and relevant. And so that's how I started completely independently, and I was able to get just a couple of spaces to show work, and then I started doing that. And then I was very fortunate to be hired as a co-curator at the Glendale Central Library with the little gallery space that dealt with, the whole mission was to address social justice issues. And so doing many, many different types of social justice issues, including Armenian and Korean and Japanese and slavery and indigenous Native American rights and Holocaust and all these things across the board. But I'm fortunate, I think, in that my curatorial work and my artistic work kind of are in the same vein. They all deal with social justice issues, historic issues related with communities that are still struggling and trying to heal. So there's like a kind of this parallel. If I was in some museum having to show, abstract art, I don't know what I would do. I think that'd be a little bit more. There'd be more dissonance there, definitely. So I'm fortunate, I think, in that, and so I've continued in that vein, curatorial vein. But it gets tricky a lot of times because sometimes it's hard to tell, should you put your artist foot in front or your curatorial foot front, right? How do you present yourself in a particular
Oh
situation,
yeah.
right? Be it in a meeting, in like a formal meeting with people, do you say, I'm a curator doing this, or am I an artist doing this, or informal when you meet somebody, how do you present yourself, and which side of you do you kind of highlight in a particular situation? It's always tricky.
It's always tricky, and I think it all depends of how your inner self is feeling in the moment.
In the moment, I guess, yeah, right? Yes.
Because it becomes somehow bipolar, no? It's like you have
Yeah.
this. I
So,
always,
yeah.
yes,
You're a little bit schizophrenic, like,
exactly. And I think that
yeah,
there's different parts of the brain that deal with each of the scenarios.
right.
At least in my case, but
No, definitely different parts of the brain, and there's sometimes, a lot of times they're in conflict, like which one to do.
oh,
Yeah. And also, you think about curatorial projects, right? But you want to be an artist in those projects, right? This is kind of a thing that is also an issue, right? But you can't do both. You can't be a curator and then include your work in an exhibition. That's not right.
it's a battle. It's an internal battle, especially when your own practice, and it should be that way. I think the curatorial practice and your own practice as an artist should be totally connected, because that's who you are.
Yeah.
That's the truth of who you are. Your your anchor, your true self is the one guiding your practices both. Even
Exactly, right? I mean, you're the same, right, Marisa, in terms of your practice and your curatorial, they go in the same direction, also. So you're always in this kind of, yeah. And I think the difficulties with individual conversations for me, with a particular person, you're always thinking, should I speak about myself as an artist? Should I speak as a curator? Because you can have many more collaborative, I think, situations. I don't know if this is how you feel also as a curator, because other curators are always ready to collaborate and create new space, new ideas, and things like this. While artists tend to be a little bit more individualistic and work more on their own rather than try to connect with our other artists. And so curators are always, I don't know, I don't know if it's true, but it's like that's been kind of my experience.
well, it's true to you, which is good. It's
Yeah.
true to you, and it's probably your experience. I don't know if I have the same experience, but it's
Interesting.
important your experience here. But I think
Okay.
but it's definitely sometimes you have to read the scenario before
Right.
you introduce yourself, or I
Exactly.
think in many cases in front of an institution, or in front of, like you say, other professionals, other curators or art directors, or is when you are working as a curator, especially for the longest time or with a long practice on that, is better to say that you're a curator, because from an institution point of view, I feel most of the time they probably feel or they sense, okay, she or he or whatever wants to have an exhibition here.
Yeah, exactly,
They
right? You
wanna-
want something from them, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about their own ego. It's about their work. It's not
Yeah, yeah.
about the general
Right.
process or the
Exactly.
professional area. That's the feeling most of the
No,
time.
I think that's what I was trying to say, and you articulated it much better than I
No,
did.
but I think
Yeah.
that's the feeling that I had. A lot of time when you get to an official meeting, especially in the museums or in the biennales, or when you're a curator, I don't think it's that well received when you say, "Oh, I'm an artist
Oh,
myself."
yeah. I'm an artist. You want to see my
It's,
work? Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
You're right, exactly. So you have to be careful.
exactly.
But
Yeah.
but like on a personal level, I think for me they flow together, the two practices
Okay.
really well, and they feed on each other. Like I will work on something of mine and I'll have an idea that I will actually use in the gallery to show, or an idea, maybe the presentation or something could be used for another artist's work that we're showing. And so it's always constantly, there is this flow back and forth. So my ideas here go there and ideas there go here. And so to me, it's been really, expansive in that way.
There's also a big benefit, and I see it in your case because I know you and I work with you, that I feel connected with you in that way, because we can leave the ego aside.
Uh-huh.
And I think in certain points, when you're working for others, because that's it, you're really elevating somebody else's work, you leave your ego, the one that is connected just with your own work and your own self, you leave it behind, and you really support somebody else's practice, and to push that practice to the maximum possible, to the maximum level that you could possibly reach.
Exactly. I mean, that's our job as curators, right? I mean, to elevate other people's work, right? Ideas and work and displays. So I think that's really, really important to do that. And as I said, it's like I'm fortunate that my own work kind of feeds into those ideas and back and forth. So that happens to me all the time. Like, I just showed you this grid that I did, right? So that the grid. So I have been obsessed with the grid for a long time, because I thought, the idea of this grid of photos and text is when you step back, you see the whole community, right? As you step back. But then as you step closer, you see the eyes, you can read the text, so it becomes personal, this kind of relationship. But the grid is really kind of gritty, it's very square, right? And so we're working with the photographer now in our gallery, and he had done portraits, and he had displayed them once already as kind of a grid. And I was like, but let's find something different, find other way, because I wasn't totally happy with my grid. I said, let's find another way to present this work, not grid-like. And so we were able to actually do something we're going to do a really interesting, sort of a double helix kind of presentation of the photos in our gallery. And so that came directly out of my own, not dissatisfaction, but not complete satisfaction with the kind of presentation that I had done, that I want to do something a little less formal, that I took this idea and we're doing it with this other artist.
Almost like keep digging into your own research. Suddenly you find another answer for the work. Yes. And Ara, here that we're talking about curatorial practice, so maybe you want to share with us what's going on with the new museum. This is big time. I'm super excited for you about this project.
It's not the Lucas Museum of Narrative Art. It's not LACMA.
No, but it's a very large project and a very important project for the city. City, for California. I think I'm super excited about this project and about you working as a part of that.
It's a huge, very, very important, tremendously important project for us. So let me just take a couple step back. So 2015 was the centennial of the Armenian genocide. So many of Armenian communities are descendants of Armenian genocide survivors, and so 100th anniversary was like this huge thing that it was commemorated across the world, many things. And so this project kind of was born at that time, where we as a community, we don't have a large institution, Armenian institution. There's one in Boston. It's been there since the 80s, but on the West Coast, in Los Angeles, Southern California, there's no such institution. And so the idea was born and this sort of community-based with political organizations, cultural organizations, churches, which have a lot of resources and a lot of influence in the community, all came together to create this huge project. So it's called the Armenian Museum and Cultural Center of California, and there was a deal done with the city of Glendale. So there was this park in the center of the city, where the city basically one of these deals where for like 99 years for $1 or something like that, gave the land to the museum, and parking was created underneath the museum such that the green space that was taken up by the museum because of the construction would be elsewhere. So the parking lots were kind of taken on the ground. So the total amount of green space didn't increase with this new building. And it's this building that's, it's a generational kind of project, Marisa. And I was very fortunate. So right now I'm working with them on a consulting basis as a director of exhibitions, trying to come up with 3 years of exhibitions for them once the museum opens. It's still under construction, but I can show you. I can show everybody
I think everybody
a
will be
rendering.
very interested in seeing the space, this new museum that is coming up in Los Angeles area in Glendale. Yes, gorgeous. The building is fantastic.
Yeah, so this is kind of the facade is very much in it's kind of reflective facade, but it's also everything in the museum is inspired by either natural or cultural natural things from Armenia. So these kind of formations are actually, there's a rock formation in Armenia. It's called the Symphony of Rocks. And so this kind of facade is inspired by that. And the shadow you see here is like the mountainous regions, Armenia being very mountainous, is kind of reflected on in that. And
I have the chance. I want to share with everybody that already Ara took me for a little, a little,
yes,
a little, visit, and it's just amazing. It's incredible, inside out. I'm so excited for the whole community. This is going to change the game around the community there. I truly believe that it's going to be magnificent for the
yes, oh,
entire
definitely.
city and the community especially.
Yes, exactly. So the idea is, so it's an American Armenian Museum, but it's going to, I think, impact the whole city and and the region. I'm hoping, I'm imagining, and inside there's going to be one area that kind of tells the history of the Armenian nation, but another very large area, 2 huge galleries are going to be changing exhibitions. And like you were saying, Marisa, the whole idea there is to create dialogue with other cultures, not, highlight Armenian artists and culture makers, obviously cultural workers, but also create dialogue with other cultures, with the Latinx cultures, with Black and Indigenous, Filipino, Korean, Japanese, to be a space where all cultures are included, inclusive, and this kind of dialogue can be created. I think it's something. I mean, it happens. I think a lot of really good curators create that kind of space, but in terms of an institution, kind of its goal being that creating that kind of dialogue. I hope it's going to be something unique.
Los Angeles is a very large community, and as you know, I don't know if you agree or disagree, but we need more spaces. We really do.
Yes.
It's a large community. There's so many artists and so many voices that there still have no place or not engagement with a certain institutions. So I
Exactly.
think some fresh air and some fresh ideas, new ideas, and different line of work is really important.
Yeah, and as we were saying earlier, a lot of Armenian artists don't have the kind of visibility that they should have, I think, and so this is one place that's possible to create that visibility for them and other artists, like you were saying, who don't have oftentimes the visibility. And it's like it's the first museum. Well, I guess there's the Museum of Neon Art, but I guess it's the first museum in the city of Glendale that was created in the city of Glendale. And so it's like a very, very important institution for the city also. So a lot of support from the city, a lot of support from the community, a lot of support from the state and some federal also, but um, but it's a big project. It's like,
I'm super excited for you, and I cannot even tell you since I know the news, because I know how serious you are, and I work with you in few projects around diverse, and I think it just not only I love to work with you, but also I learned how professional you are.
forward to, I mean, one of my to work with you in this new space also. You know, we've collaborated on different projects, but I really look forward to once it opens to work together to do exhibitions, bring in some of the amazing artists that you know and you curate and create this dialogue. I mean, has there been dialogue between Armenian and Latin American artists? Not much.
Not
So
much,
this is where
not
we can
much.
create that
No,
because there's
no.
so many parallel histories, right, of war and colonial meddling and displacement, right? So there's all these parallels that we can.
A lot of these communities, especially talking from Latin America, South America, there's large communities in South America. And I think there is not enough conversations about that
Exactly.
in the art world. They're
Right.
really not.
Yes.
So I think we are looking forward to see more, to know more, to support you more, as you know, with anything else that you need with this project.
Thank you. Thank you.
And
Yeah. I can mention the exhibition we're thinking about doing, maybe. So, the audience may have heard of Osamu Noguchi, the Japanese artist, a designer and sculptor, and Arshil Gorky is also one of the very well-known abstract expressionist painters. So they were very close friends, Arshil Gorky and Osamu Noguchi, and they traveled across country together. They participated in protests together in New York. They painted, they drew together actually. They spent time together. Noguchi saw him like 2 days before he committed suicide, before Gorky committed suicide. And you can clearly see some works that are influenced, internal and personal dialogue happening between these two artists. And this is the kind of exhibition that we want to bring to the museum. These really, really important, significant artists, but who also have this cultural dialogue that they've created, both being outsiders. You know, in the 40s, 30s and 40s, they were both in New York in this kind of white world, and they were the only two, like Japanese and an Armenian, who pretended to be Russian, and so there were these kind of two diasporic people, artists, who connected, and there's a
who have
dialogue there.
this bond, this beautiful bond,
This
no?
beautiful
Yeah,
bond of
yeah.
art and culture, you know, and history. And so this is exactly what we want this museum to be about. So that's one of the things we want to bring there.
I'm super excited.
Yeah.
Well, and we just talk and talk, and
We
it's
could
over
talk
an hour.
forever, right?
We could talk forever. I don't know, according to everything that's going on in the world today, your own practice, we see a very difficult situation that is touching all of us. But at the same time, like in these parallel realities, this hope for the future. Like we're talking about this museum, and we're still talking about bonding cultures and creating this, this strong dialogue, and how art can really reshape and is actually currently shaping this, the world every day. So something of how you feel and something that you want to leave everybody thinking about,
Yeah, it's kind of, you were talking about being schizophrenic between, being very depressed in the world and having hope, kind of in the, like all the communities that I'm connected with, where I came, from Lebanon being constantly war, and then I have a lot of friends from Syria, and Syria went through war, Iraq war from 20 years ago, and now Iran, where there's like large communities Iranian and as well as Iranian Armenian communities. So my communities are directly impacted. So there's this just like nonstop, and the Armenian communities near Armenia being displaced recently that I'm doing on. So every generation, it seems like it doesn't stop. But that's kind of the side on the one side. On the other side, like you said, I think there's hope. There's the fact that we have the resources here to create culture and create art that will impact people, that will make them think differently, that will make them see, create this dialogue between cultures that will maybe allow them to see the world differently, and then that could also impact larger communities, larger processes in our society. We're saying some of it is our fault in our government meddling in different parts of the world, and so if we can do our part to open up people's minds somewhat, to also then impact higher levels of what our government is doing in our name, and stop doing that kind of thing. I think that presents some hope for us.
Especially you say it, things that are done in our name, in the name of the communities, which we have no take on that, especially.
Yeah, I'm like we're United States. I'm a United States citizen. I pay taxes, and that's going to do these horrible things overseas. And we hope we can impact that kind of attitude. As I said, change is very difficult, but changing attitudes, and then hopefully over time those attitudes will kind of multiply, and we can have some kind of change happening.
And change is very difficult, but it's possible, little by little. I think more than anything, understanding is possible when we
Yes.
know each other. I think the more that we try to cultivate this understanding, try to listen to each other, is a way to create this change, even little by little. But it's difficult. It's difficult.
As artists and curators, we hope to create this dialogue, right? This is what we're doing, really, to present our work or other people's work, to create this dialogue, right? This is what we do, and so the more we create that dialogue, I think the better it is for us in general.
It's always a miracle. Well, always, I truly believe that art do miracles. We're very grateful to be able to listen to you and to hear a little bit more about your story, where you're coming from, and what is your way of seeing life and your own practice. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Marisa, and this dialogue, this conversation that we've had here has been really good, really great.
Thank you, and we're looking forward to collaborate with you and to keep doing things in the art world.